between climate change and tourism, particularly looking at polar bear viewing tourism. So Nilsson gave a nice introduction about sort of who I am. So yeah, I did my Bachelor's of Arts at Concordia, finished my Master's of Arts in Geography at the University of Ottawa. I finished that at the end of 2019. And coming into a pandemic year, looking for a job, super difficult, but managed to keep myself busy. I'm doing a part-time job as a content manager for Happy Eco News. So that's a website that we promote positive environmental news to people around the world. So it's been a lot of fun doing that. I'm also doing a research internship for the Parti Vert du Québec. I'm a Zumba instructor, and after all that, I'm really hoping to find a career in waste management and community outreach, particularly looking at clothing waste. So that's a little bit about me. And then I always like to start these presentations kind of talking to you about why I decided to go to the Arctic and study the Arctic. So during my bachelor's degree, I kind of became more interested in learning about the Arctic and learning how it was being influenced by climate change. So when I decided that I wanted to do a master's, I really wanted to focus on the Arctic, and I had this like side obsession with polar bears, so I wanted to kind of make that part of my project. So when I was looking for a supervisor, I came across Dr. Jackie Dawson from the University of Ottawa, who had done a project in 2007 with some of her colleagues, which looked at this relationship between climate change and tourism. And I said to myself, that is the most perfect project for me. So I contacted her, and unfortunately, she doesn't do that sort of research anymore, but she invited me into her lab to take on this project as an independent. And yeah, it all pretty much worked out to my benefit. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what she did and then how that ties into what my project essentially was. So why Churchill? What's so special about Churchill, Manitoba? It's a small subarctic town located right here at the edge of the Hudson Bay, kind of in the middle of the Arctic tundra and the boreal forest. So it's a really unique environment. It's a small population. I think the latest statistics were less than 900 people. And it's a lot of the people that live there also not permanent residents. So there's a lot of people coming in and out at different times of the year in Churchill. So the important industries in Churchill are their health services. So they are pretty much a hub for a lot of the northern regions in the Arctic in Canada. There's international shipping, so they ship their grain to Europe. There's a lot of scientific research. Like I just said, it's such a unique environment. So there's a lot of physical science research projects looking at the landscape, animals, biodiversity, things like that. And then, of course, their tourism industry. So at different times during the year, they have different tourism seasons. So from at the beginning of the year, January to February, it's the best time to see the aurora borealis because the temperatures are minus 50 degrees Celsius. So it's a great time to go see that. In the summer months, you can go see the birds. There's beluga watching. And then from October to November, it's the best time to see the polar bears. So how to get to Churchill. I bring this up because this is actually a pretty important part of what my project was. So unlike most regions in the Arctic, there are actually no roads that connect to Churchill. So you can't actually drive to Churchill. There is a little bit of cruise ship tourism. It's growing very slowly, but of course that's seasonal because the bay does freeze. They do have a train that runs from Winnipeg to Churchill. It takes about 2 days to get there. And unfortunately, from spring 2017 to fall 2018, the rail line was actually closed due to some infrastructure problems caused by flooding. So this had a really, bad impact on the community because they do depend on this rail line, for food, for traveling to different communities. So that hurt them pretty bad. But in fall 2018, when I was actually there, The rail line opened up. It was a huge party. The community was so happy. Justin Trudeau paid a little visit, and I got a selfie with him, of course. So now the train is up and running. And when I was there in 2019 for work, I actually got to take the train, and it was, although it's 2 days, it's a really fascinating experience because you get to see so much different landscape. So yeah, and then of course there is the air. So it's a 1 hour trip from Winnipeg to Churchill, and as you can imagine, that's the most preferred mode of transportation for people traveling to Churchill because it's direct and doesn't take a lot of time to get there. So other than those tourism seasons that I mentioned, there's actually a lot to do in Churchill. It's a pretty historic town. It used to be a military base. They did a lot of research with rockets, kind of trying to understand the Aurora Borealis because they believe that it was kind of masking communication. So there's a lot of interesting things and historical artifacts to see around there. You can also go dog sledding. You can go for tours around the town. There's these mural tours that they started in 2017, I believe. So there's actually quite a bit to do in Churchill for such a small town. There's actually a lot to do. And so obviously today I'm going to be talking to you more about the polar bear viewing tours. And that has to do with the subpopulation of polar bears that live in and around Churchill. So out of the 29 subpopulations that we have in the Arctic, the one that lives in and around Churchill is the Western Hudson Bay subpopulation. And they're unique compared to a lot of other subpopulations because they can only hunt for about 8 months during the year because the bay does melt. So for 4 months, they're off land. So really that 8-month period is crucial for them to hunt. They're hunting for ring seals. That's their main source of food. So yeah, for the other 4 months, they're kind of just hanging about, trying to preserve their energy. And then when the bay starts to freeze from October to November, which is why that's the best time to see them, they're kind of making their way towards the water. They're waiting for the sea ice to freeze. They're just lying around. They're just waiting for that period. And what's really unique about Churchill as an Arctic town is that, so Churchill's kind of built right in the middle of where these bears are traveling to in order to get to the bay. So there is obviously an opportunity for bears to kind of come into the town, especially, during that time when they're starting to get hungry, they're looking for food. So Churchill actually has this program which they set up to live among the bears. So it's called the Polar Bear Alert Program, and basically it's if you see a bear in a place where there's people, you contact this number and the Polar Bear Alert Program will come and kind of just push, but not physically push, and kind of just like scare the bear into the direction it wants to go. Because at the end of the day, it's hungry and it wants food, but there are obviously people living in Churchill. So it's the only place in the Arctic that actually has a program set up like this to live among the bears, which is really cool. So the Churchill polar bears viewing tourism industry is, it's big for a small town. There's no accurate numbers that have calculated how many tourists go to Churchill to see the polar bears. It's definitely over 10,000 people in a period of about 2 months, which is pretty significant. So the main kind of players in this are Frontiers North Adventures, Great White Bears, and as of late, if you've been following some of the Arctic news, Lazy Bear Expeditions is kind of coming in to be one of these big players. And basically, these two companies have permits where they can offer tours into the Churchill Wildlife Management Area, which is kind of like the best sort of area to see the bears. And I'll show you a picture in just a second of what that looks like. And then there's obviously some other smaller tour operators who offer like lodging, different activities, and also other experiences to see the polar bears in their natural environment, not necessarily on these big, what they call tundra buggies, but in different sort of vehicles. So this is what it looks like. Basically, you're going on this buggy that's high enough off the ground so that if a bear were to kind of put its paws up on the side of the vehicle, people are not at risk of getting hurt. So basically, you drive around for about 6 hours on these roads, which have been there since the military days. So nothing has actually been constructed for this tourism industry to work. And yeah, you basically just drive around looking for bears, also other wildlife. So during this time, you can see Arctic hares, what else? Ptarmigan, foxes, things like that. So it's a really unique experience for a lot of people. It's definitely probably the safest way, I guess, to see a polar bear in its natural environment. What a lot of people don't get, and it kind of gets me angry, and is that, we want to see these bears kind of putting on a show for us, but, like I just said, they're tired, they're hungry, they don't want to be moving and playing around. So a lot of the time you will see just a bear lying in the willows or against or on some sea ice. And that's, cool, because a lot of people don't really get that experience to see a bear in its natural environment. So yeah, it's really cool way to do that. So this is where my research actually comes in, and where we start to really look at this relationship between climate change and tourism. So hopefully we all know and we all agree that climate change is happening. And this intensification of climate change is caused by human activities due to our dependence on fossil fuels, this increase in deforestation activities, more development projects popping up all over the place. And what's happening is that all of these projects and things that we're doing is creating carbon emissions, which is rising to the atmosphere and causing global temperatures to rise. And the Arctic is one of the places in the world which are experiencing these changes a lot worse, I guess, than other places in the world. Their temperatures are rising even more quickly. And what's happening is we're seeing more snow is melting, more ice is melting, and that is causing a disruption for the animals who depend on these landscapes, such as the polar bears. So in the case of the polar bears, we're seeing that the sea ice, which the polar bears knew back in the days that it would freeze in by latest November, but we're seeing a longer trend to this freezing period. So it's taking longer for the ice to freeze, and the ice is actually melting much quicker than it has been. So that is really limiting the time that a polar bear can hunt, which means less food for them. And it's extremely risky for the mother bears, who are actually have less time to hunt. So they are trying to eat up as much food as possible so that they can go into their dens and support their babies. So what's happening now is this decrease in time that they can hunt is, causing malnutrition and a decrease in polar bear populations. So the kind of irony of this is that polar bears have kind of become this picture of climate change. We kind of associate climate change to polar bears and the loss of their habitats. And what's happening is a lot of media sources are kind of encouraging people to go to these places, much like Churchill, to see these bears before they disappear or become extinct. And what's happening is that we're seeing an increase in tourist demand, which obviously is is great for the local economies, but for the environment, not so much, because tourism actually represents 8% of global carbon emissions, and these numbers are continuing to rise due to the dependence on air travel, which is one of the most carbon intensive modes of transportation. And over the past few years, air travel has been increasing because it's becoming more affordable, more accessible, and people are taking longer trips. And obviously, like the pandemic kind of helped that because no one was traveling, but it's predicted that once the pandemic is over, that these emissions are going to go back, are going to rise probably even more than pre-pandemic days by 2023. So it's something to keep an eye on. And of course, then we come full circle because this increase in tourist demand and taking the plane and things like that is yet another human activity which is causing rising global temperatures, the disruption of natural habitat, and this cycle continues. And it's not to say that tourism is exclusively the cause of the destruction of natural habitats, and tourism is why polar bears are disappearing, but it definitely plays a factor in this whole cycle. So in 2007, which was a very important year for tourism because the United Nations of World Travel Tourism Organization, I don't remember, but one of those, they were starting to kind of look at not only how tourism destinations were being affected by climate change, so kind of this disruption in tourism seasons, kind of the reduction, I guess, of activities that they could offer due to climate change. But they were looking at the other side of this as well to see, how carbon intensive tourism actually is, mostly because of the transportation, but also because of the accommodations and activities, which are also quite carbon intensive. So my supervisor, Dr. Jackie Dawson, and colleagues, they did the first study in North America, which actually looked at this relationship between climate change and tourism and measured the greenhouse gas emissions from the industry, and also found out sort of what tourists know about climate change and sort of the reasons why they were traveling to Churchill. And what they found out through their calculations is that, yes, for sure, this is a super energy intensive industry because of that dependence of air travel. And also, tourists are traveling to this place because there is a risk that they won't be able to see a polar bear in their lifetime due to climate change. So that was sort of the findings that they found. And this study has been cited in so many tourism studies that look at like last chance tourism, but nobody's ever really gone back to see if anything has changed. So that was my goal, is to see, we're talking about climate change more, we know more about climate change, but has anything changed in this industry over a period of 10 years? So I did that, following the same tools that my supervisor had used. So I did this doing visitor surveys from October 16th to November 16, 2018. So really capturing that polar bear viewing season. I collected over 500 surveys, which is, it's a small representation of the polar bear viewing tourism industry, because as I said, there's probably about like 10,000 people who go there in that short period. But it does give us an idea of, who's traveling there, what they know, and how energy intensive this industry is. So I conducted my survey in two places in Churchill, and these are kind of the two places where you're most likely to see people gathering in Churchill. It's hard to find somewhere where there's like a common place. So the Churchill Northern Study Center, which is a research center, which is where I stayed. So they offer what they call learning vacations. So tourists can actually stay there for about a week, participate in all the fun Churchill activities, and go on these polar bear viewing tours. So some of my responses were from here. And then in order to capture a better representation of sort of the entire industry, I went to the Churchill airport to conduct my surveys. And when I was told that that's where I would be surveying, I kind of got nervous because I thought it would look like the Montreal airport, which is a huge zoo. But if you've ever been to a remote airport or airport in the Arctic, it's basically one room. Tourists are there for maybe an hour max, and then they get on their plane and they leave. So yeah, I wasn't expecting that, and it was definitely a lot of work to do that, to kind of get them to do the survey before they left. But people were excited to be part of the research. So I definitely got a lot of respondents coming from doing my surveys at the Churchill airport, which was pretty exciting. So looking at some of my tourist demographics, just to give you an idea of who is actually traveling to Churchill. So the average polar bear viewing tourist is female, 64 years of age, holds a bachelor or graduate degree. And this is like 100% in line with the study from 2007, but also with other last chance tourism studies, which is pretty interesting. So 68% of my respondents were coming from the United States, which is kind of surprising because in 2007, there was more of an equal divide between the US and Canada in terms of who was traveling to Churchill. And, we could assume that it's because of the low Canadian dollar, which is attracting more people from the States to travel to Churchill. But also there's a lot more, I guess, advertisement to the US states to entice them to come to Winnipeg and Churchill, which is pretty interesting. So now looking at the greenhouse gas emissions for polar bear viewing tourists. So this, the way this was done was I calculated the transportation from tourists, which in this case, because the rail line was closed in 2018, every single person traveling to Churchill had to take the plane. So I was able to, I'll show you here, calculate the greenhouse emissions from their plane trips. So how I did that was in the survey, I basically asked tourists to tell me how they got to Churchill, mostly just focusing on their plane trip because for confidentiality purposes, we can't actually ask them where they live and things like that. So with that information, I was able to use 3 online carbon calculators, which are available to the public to use. And basically what you do is you put, where you're going, where you're coming from, or the opposite way. And it gives you a calculation of your greenhouse emissions from your trip. And on some of these websites as well, you can make a donation to kind of offset those emissions. So I did that for over 500 people, which was fun. And then calculating the accommodations and activities. So there are no recent studies of the greenhouse gas emissions for tourism, which is pretty surprising. So I used, for accommodations, I used the calculations that the United Nations had calculated in 2007 when they were really interested in knowing how carbon intensive tourism is. So I used those numbers, and then also using numbers for the activities in Churchill, so such as helicopter rides, transportation to the tundra buggy launches, emissions from the tundra buggies, things like that. Those were calculated in 2007 from my supervisor and colleagues. Again, there are no recent studies that show the greenhouse gas emissions, so I had to use the information that was already there. So basically putting this all together and looking at the emissions, you can see that emissions are, depending where you're coming from, 0.7 to 8.25 tons of CO2 emissions, comparing that to what an average global tourist will emit. It's pretty high. And you can see that, it's pretty much the same emissions that they saw in 2007. So it may seem a little lower, but if you look at the total emissions for the entire polar bear tourism industry, we've actually increased over a period of a little bit more than 10 years. And that's due to the increasing the amount of tourists that are coming to Churchill. So these numbers are pretty significant and pretty high. And again, a lot of it is coming because of that dependence on air travel, which unfortunately, they didn't really have a choice but to take the plane. So part of my survey as well was just finding out what tourists actually know about climate change. So it's great to see, happy to see this, that, more almost everybody believe that climate change is happening. And they do believe that it's because of the strong human influence. But not a lot of people believe that air travel is a contributor to climate change. And this is a similar response to 2007. And part of this is because A, not a lot of people are talking about this, and B, you won't necessarily see the impact you have from your one trip to Churchill or really your one trip to anywhere. So it's kind of hard to make that make sense, for tourists to say that, oh, my trip is actually a contributor to climate change. So that's something that we need to start talking about, because it's likely that one trip to Churchill is not going to be their only trip. They're probably, other than the fact that we're in a pandemic, will probably travel to other places, and they'll probably choose air travel as their mode of transportation. So it needs to be kind of talked about a little bit more. And what's also interesting is that 59% of people don't actually believe that polar bears will disappear from the Churchill region due to changes in the global climate, which, again, similar to results from 2007, which for me, I find pretty interesting. And I think it's likely due to the fact that these tourists will probably see at least one bear on their trip. So it's kind of similar to air travel. It's kind of hard to really make that make sense in their minds that these bears are at risk of climate change. So really interesting information from that. And then I went a little bit further in my research, because that's what I do. And I wanted to find out what tourists thought would be the best strategies to reduce impact from climate change. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are traveling. They're the ones who are either going to opt in or opt out of these strategies or things like that to reduce emissions. So it's important to know what they think would work. So the big one was definitely educational programs. What's great about Churchill and pretty much most of their tourism operators is that they give lectures to their tourists. They provide them with the information about climate change, about polar bears, something that has definitely evolved over the past 10 years, but they're missing that little point of saying what tourists can actually do to reduce their own impacts from climate change. And especially about travel, it's obviously a little bit more difficult for a tour operator to say, like, travel is energy intensive, but there's definitely ways to kind of bring attention to this and to provide some solutions for tourists to either do while they're there at Churchill, or to take home with them and do at home or on their next trip. Another big one was providing travel alternatives, such as taking the train. A lot of my respondents said that they would have been interested in taking the train to Churchill versus taking the plane. So it would be interesting if anyone else ever did the study again to look at how many people are actually taking the train now to get to Churchill. So environmental taxes were another one. We're seeing that now with the carbon tax in Canada. I'm not so sure how much that influences air travel, but it's definitely a step in the right direction of how we can reduce our emissions. The availability of greenhouse emission data. So that's kind of like how restaurants started putting the amount of calories on their menus. So you would see basically the greenhouse gas emissions from your trip on like your plane ticket or when you're booking your trip, to kind of give you an idea of next steps and kind of how to reduce those emissions. And then there's also, they propose carbon offset programs, which are not as popular as they were in 2007 when they first were introduced. It's basically just putting money towards a positive environmental program, such as like planting trees or environmental research, to kind of offset your emissions from travel. But of course, it's obviously up for debate of where that money actually goes and if it kind of equals to the emissions from your trip. So there's a lot of interesting things that that came from this that, you know, we can start thinking about when we're planning our post-pandemic trips, to kind of make travel more sustainable and kind of start talking about this a little bit more. And you know, it's not, this project is not to say that travel is bad, because obviously travel is super important for small towns and communities, much like Churchill, whose a lot of their economy is based on tourism, and especially the polar bear viewing industry. It brings in a lot of money for the town. But it's just to say that we need to start moving towards a more sustainable approach to travel, especially as it becomes more accessible and more affordable. So that's something for you all to think about. And if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about sort of the more technical details about what this project entailed, me and my colleagues wrote a paper about this project that's available to everybody. If you want, I can send it to you, or you can just look this up on Google. But yeah, so we can open it up to questions if you'd like, if we have time.
Yeah, we have time and we can open up to questions. And thank you, Jaime. It is really very interesting. And
I have a question.
Yes.
yeah, David, I would like to leave it to David, because yes, David, we're listening to you.
Yes, a couple of questions. I for many years was the honorary of Iceland, and one of the problems over to many. Now, in a
on there
short,
twice.
can you hear me?
Not well.
No, okay, I'll stop talking.
Now it's better. Let's mute all of us ourselves. Just David will speak. That will be okay, I guess.
Okay, one of the problems in Iceland is too many, which impact on the environment. Now, in a short period of time,
everybody has to be muted.
10,000.
Yeah, everybody has to mute it except David, okay?
Who's the 314 phone number?
David Frank. It's okay, I won't speak anymore.
David, do you have two phones? No?
No, it's okay, forget it. Okay.
Just a moment. Just a moment. Okay.
Try it now. Yeah.
Now you can speak, David.
One of the problems in Iceland is over tourism has an impact on the environment. With 10,000 in a short time, problem.
Now, David, you're on there twice.
Okay, forget.
You have a phone and something else, and when you want, even though we muted the phone, when as soon as you start talking, it unmuted, and
Okay.
that's why we're getting an echo.
Okay. Okay.
Just
Important.
David, just Let me mute this one, okay? Maybe try to mute it. Now, can you please speak, David? Let's see. No.
It's
Now I will do the other way around. Just a moment, because. Okay, can you please speak? Let's try this one. We cannot
Okay.
hear.
He's muted. He has muted himself. I have a question.
Yeah, I have to go. Bye-bye.
Sorry, David. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye. I have to go. Bye-bye.
No, it's okay, it seems. You can speak now.
He's left. Oops,
He
he's
left.
gone.
Okay. So anybody has any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Jamie, in my youth, I visited Churchill because I spent a lot of time in the north, and we used to see the polar bears basically at the garbage dump. Is that still part of the sort of tourist routine?
If I'm correct, I think they moved the garbage dump inside because it was causing too much issues. So now they have more of an enclosed space for the polar bears. But yeah, that used to be like the it place for kind of to see
That's
a
right.
bear.
That's right.
Which is
I remember it well. Anyway,
yeah.
great. Congratulations on your research, and
Thank you.
I really think it's cool. And polar bears are something that Canadians should really make an effort not to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, are the emissions from the train a lot less than by air, or, because it's running for 2 days?
Yeah. I don't remember the number. I think it was like I did a calculation for it and measuring like from Winnipeg to Churchill for both.
Okay.
And it's significantly less. I think it's at least like 2 to 3 times less
Okay.
than. So it's definitely a better alternative.
Yeah.
Even though it takes a bit longer, but you're getting like a double vacation out of it. So yeah, it's a different experience.
Jamie, thank you. It was really very interesting. On one hand, you want to go to Churchill and see the polar bears. It's really attractive. But on the other hand, being a responsible person, you should not do that. Is there any other study about the travel? And for example, the Seychelles Islands, I think they're also, these kind of islands are also in danger. Such study for them, and when you compare it with the polar bears in the Arctic, how do you see that?
So what's interesting about this is that I don't think there are any pretty much like tourism studies which have calculated the greenhouse gas emissions from their industry, with the exception of maybe Antarctica tourism. But that study was done in like 2007 as well. There are a lot of studies that look at sort of this, why are tourists traveling to these places? And they've all concluded that it's kind of to see them before they disappear, but also to learn about them. So a lot of people are finding that, if they go to see these places and like see what it looks like now that climate change has kind of, impacted it, like what can they do? So there's a lot of studies like that, but nobody really has looked at how carbon intensive travel is. And a lot of these studies, kind of to back up their research, have cited that 2007 study. Hopefully now they can cite mine, but yeah, there's surprisingly no research on that, which is pretty shocking.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amy. It was really good, and it is really, how can I say, very positive, or gives me positivity young people like you is dealing with climate change and pushing us who caused this to do the right things. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome all the time. Thank you. So I think we have a couple of minutes left. Jamie, if you want, you can leave or stay with us. We have the committee meeting, just a couple of minutes. We had some items to discuss. And so anything you want to say? The next meeting we're going to have is 2 weeks from now on, which is the
27.
27th, okay. And last meeting we have agreed to work on the waste management. This is also Jamie's subject, one of the famous subjects. And is there anything you want to share about this subject?
Yeah, actually, that kind of fits in with kind of another project that I'm trying to start. So when I was at the University of Ottawa, I worked at what they call a free store. So it's basically just collecting donations from students and giving it away for free to reduce the amount of waste that is being thrown into the landfill, which is surprisingly a lot. So yeah, I'm trying to start up a project here in Montreal that kind of has that same vision to reduce the amount of clothing waste and just like household waste that ends up in the garbage. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of fits in with what you guys are looking at, but it'd be good to partner with you for that if you're interested.
We think it's that we can start with the food waste. There's lots of food waste in Montreal, so that can be one of the things, and the tar recycling. Did you have anything, guys, on this subject? To be honest, I don't have much.
Well, you've got the groups like Moisson Montreal that do a certain amount of recovery from, industrial or such sources. That one of the things they do is when people are canning stuff, they have to provide a certain number of cases and that's it. But they always, make more so that they won't run short. And at the end, they may end up having a whole pallet of canned soup that is extra. And normally, until recently, that sort of thing would have basically gone in the garbage because they were in unlabeled cans. And what Moisson Montreal is able to do is they get the donation of that from the food packer and they get the labeling information. And they basically print the label so that it's legal and put the label on the top of the can with their volunteers and then can use that food that, otherwise would have gone to waste because, one pallet trying to label it under a private label brand and all that, how do you do it with just one pallet? And there's a certain amount of that they've, been able to do. So there's groups like that reduce that sort of waste, but it's yeah.
I believe we should start with awareness. Unless people
I agree with you. We should start something that is easy and have an impact on it, and that we can do because in our abilities.
Having pamphlets, putting it on the media, young people going on the streets, introducing the cause of all this pollution, all these food waste, what it will cause to their future kids, their future generation. I think we start with this, then we go to, and this needs a lot of effort using the youth to help us, because most of the new generation are youth. So you need to make them understand the cause of all of this.
Yeah. And also the older generation, as you see, 60%, the population visiting Arctic is the older ones, not the young ones. So I agree with you. Everybody in this society has to have this awareness and start doing something, little or big, about this subject.
Mm.
So let's do it this way if you want. Next meeting, as I said, it is 27th of May. This time we will focus on this awareness, what kind of thing we can do about awareness, where should we start? Everybody, each of us work on a plan and come back with a plan, discuss it and agree an action plan to work on it.
Exactly.
Okay,
That's okay.
I agree with that. Tony, you have something, I guess.
Yeah, well, I did.
I did not forget.
I had committed to to speak to Cynthia Lillum, who's a councillor Westmount, and she would be happy, pleased to speak to our committee about basically all sorts of. She's in charge of parks in Westmount. And so there was this issue of tree planting and stuff like that. I said, so you know, and quite frankly, she's been a counselor for some time, and I suspect, well, you know, it would be quite entertaining. She's very knowledgeable across all the, you know, the parks and everything like that. So she said she'd be willing to speak. And it doesn't have to be long, you know, like it could be in 2 weeks or it could be in a month. But like I think, you know, she'd be.
Okay, so whenever she thinks she has time and can talk to us, we are ready. That will be good, and we can find out other projects from her present discussion,
Okay.
I should say. That will be great. So you tell us when she can join us, okay?
Okay, all right.
Thank
I'll
you.
speak to her. I'll speak to her again, and let's just so because it's emailing and zooming and all this sort of stuff. Let's say that she'll speak to us on the 27th. That she's willing to speak to us. Let's plan for that. Okay.
Okay, it's okay for me. Okay, agree.
I'll speak to her. I will speak to her, and if she says no, then I will let you know. But if not, let's plan for it.
Okay,
Okay.
I agree.
Cool.
Thanks for joining also, and you should be proud of your daughter. It was a really good presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And hope to see you again, Jamie, with us. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and
You're
maybe
welcome.
I'll join you in your next meeting about waste management.
Okay.
Good.
So thank you very much for participating, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
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 Have a good day. Have a good week, guys.
Yes, we have a good weekend.
Good.